It was mostly good news for our democracy and bad news for Trump candidates in the midterms, especially the Republican candidates who, just went to DC on Jan 6 to spread lies about Biden's 2020 election win. But there's also an unexpected twist that came just at the right time. Stand by for that. Several Republican candidates running in state and federal elections had protested Biden's win over former President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. that day, and some marched to the US Capitol where a violent riot ensued. Most lost on Tuesday. Thank goodness. There were unfortunately a few exceptions. Derek Van Orden, a retired Navy SEAL endorsed by Trump, won his race in Wisconsin for the US House. He admitted to attending the Stop the Steal rally, but said he did not enter Capitol grounds or take part in the violence that ensued. Van Orden raised vastly more than his Democratic opponent, State Senator Brad Pfaff, a Democrat who unsuccessfully tried to persuade voters that Van Orden's attendance at the Jan 6 rally should disqualify him from serving in Congress. But it came down to the campaign money, didn't it? That was the big difference. Max Miller, a former Trump White House advisor who helped plan the rally that preceded the insurrection at the Capitol, according to the Jan 6 committee, also won his election and will be heading to Congress after defeating Democrat Matthew Dimer in their battle for a House seat in Ohio's 7th district. Also, Trump's thumb super weird shaped. We all know that. It's a weird loop to it. There it is. Look at it. Always so strange. It's one of the lesser known Trump hand facts. Many other Jan 6 election denier candidates, however, were not as successful, coming up huge losers in their races. Also losing were QAnon moron J.R. Majewski, who called himself an ultra MAGA candidate, failing to flip a key congressional House seat, which has been held since 1982 by Democratic Rep. Marcy Kaptur, and she will soon be the longest serving female in the House in history. And Maryland state legislator Dan Cox, who organized buses full of idiots to Trump's rally on Jan 6 and tweeted during the violence that Vice President Mike Pence was a traitor, was badly beaten by Democrat Wes Moore in the governor's race in Maryland. One of the most high-profile Republican defeats was that of Pennsylvania gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano, an outspoken election denier and Jan 6 attendee who lost by more than 14 points to Josh Shapiro, the state's Democratic Attorney General. As a state senator, Mastriano had been intimately involved in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Pennsylvania, chartered buses to bring Trump supporters as well to Washington for the Jan 6 rally. The House Select Committee investigating the events of that day subpoenaed Mastriano for documents and testimony, but he sued the committee and Nancy Pelosi in an effort to avoid testifying on camera. Even before Mastriano won the GOP primary in May, Shapiro was airing an ad linking him to Trump and the effort to audit the 2020 election. Very effective. After the matchup was set, Shapiro regularly referred in his stump speech to the possibility that Mastriano might change election results he didn't like. As he told CNN in an interview, quote, Senator Mastriano has made it clear that he will appoint electors based on his belief system. He is essentially saying, sure, you can go vote, but I will pick the winner. That is incredibly dangerous, close quote. Cox also received mixed reviews from his own party, from leaders of his own party, although he got Trump's endorsement. Maryland's current Republican governor, Larry Hogan, who is term limited, which gave him the balls to speak out, refused to back him, calling him a QAnon whack job and mentally unstable. I added the balls part to that quote. Sorry about that. From Maine to Michigan, Senate to state legislature, Republican to Democrat, most high-profile candidates who fell short in the 2022 midterm elections are offering quick concessions and gracious congratulations to their opponents. They include candidates who earned endorsements from Trump by embracing his false claims that elections are rigged against Republicans. Of course, dozens of Republican candidates who question the legitimacy of Biden's election won Tuesday and will end up in Congress, including J.D. Vance of Ohio, who won a Senate seat. And some, like Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake, haven't seen their races called yet and have hinted at invoking baseless claims of fraud. But most of those who lost ended up not following Trump's playbook. Democracy watchers are breathing a sigh of relief, especially because many feared Trump had set a precedent that Republicans might use to deny ever losing another election. There are many more examples of these losses we don't have time for now, including like Florida's Jeremy Michael Brown, who ran his unsuccessful campaign for a seat in the Florida legislature from jail for his involvement in Jan 6. I don't know how he possibly didn't win that election, but importantly, most of these candidates quickly accepted defeat. Normally that wouldn't even be a thought in our heads, but the bar has dropped so low that this incredibly important news is now so essential to our country going forward, and is a bit of good news we are sorely in need of. And even quack Dr. Oz gave a gracious concession, and very notably, heavily Trump-supported Dan Cox, who I spoke about earlier, who sent buses to Jan 6 and tweeted that Pence is a traitor during the violence at the Capitol, did not even cry foul about his loss or claim irregularities. Instead, he said, I wish Governor-elect Wes Moore and Lieutenant Governor-elect Aruna Miller and their families every blessing and success to ensure he will keep his word and govern positively for all Marylanders. Cox said in a 2-page concession statement, I will pray for them and their new role for us, for all of us. Most losing Republican candidates followed script more like Cox's than Trump's. Lastly, the biggest direct risk to our elections were, of course, the huge number of election denier candidates running for Secretary of State around the country, because they oversee, the elections themselves and whatnot. And let's take a look at how they did. There were 9 of them, and so far, only 2 wins, 5 losses, 2 more not called. Let's pray it ends up 7 losses and just 2 wins. Not ideal, but could have been so much worse for our democracy. We might live to see another day here with our system of government and hope for our country going forward. Cenk.
Yeah, so much to say here. First, Mitt Romney had this quote that everybody made fun of, binders full of women that he had, right? We got a new one from Ben Glebe, buses full of idiots.
Yes.
So, all right, and I could describe a lot of buses from the Republicans, but anyway.
The Twitter account immediately.
So now let me also say, Trump put out a statement. I didn't bother remembering the numbers because they were completely made up. He's like, lying fake news media. We actually won like 217 to 16. It's like totally made up. So it doesn't matter. I mean, we won 187,000 seats. Lying fake news media. Okay, so of course those are all made up. These are the real numbers. The Secretary of State stuff is super important, guys, because if the election deniers won those races, they're basically saying, I ain't gonna count no goddamn votes. And now look, the 2 states where they won, Indiana and Wyoming, are not swing states anyway. Now the Nevada and Arizona ones that are still outstanding are very important, okay, because those are swing states. But at least they lost in Michigan and Minnesota and New Mexico, etc. So that's generally super good news. And I told you guys before the election, the main reason to vote was to vote for Secretary of States. We cannot have people who are against democracy and who say we're not going to count the votes as a Secretary of State in all these areas. And
I should note, Cenk, that during our last break, the Nevada Independent called Jim Marchant's race as a defeat for him. So that's another W for Democrats. But I would just bring up one point, and I think that we should follow Josh Shapiro's lead here out of Pennsylvania when they asked him. When they asked him about the fact that Doug Mastriano never called to concede, and he was like, "Who cares? Like, we don't have to take our cues from these people. We don't need permission to move forward with accepting objective reality. No part of this entire process even requires their concession. So, I mean, it's a nice thing to do. I guess it's there's a degree of courtesy, whatever in it. Doesn't matter at the end of the day. Like, if these people don't want to concede, screw them."
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of Mastriano, look, that race is indicative too, and that's why Trump is in a lot of trouble. The state of Pennsylvania. We use Georgia as an example of the difference between a loony candidate like Walker and a so-called regular Republican like Kemp, and that was an 8.5 point difference. So sanity apparently makes an 8.5 point difference, but in Pennsylvania it made a bigger difference because Oz is not a great guy and he's a Trump guy, but Mastriano was full QAnon, full election denier, and it made a gigantic difference. Oz lost by a little bit, Mastriano got blown out, right? Massive loss. So that's a giant win for sanity. The voters saying, no, we don't want loons. And honestly, going into the election, we weren't sure. I mean, let's be honest. We thought there was some percentage chance that a lot of people were gonna say, oh, lunatics? Yeah, that's what we came here for, we're Republicans. But it gives some of the Republicans credit because it turns out there are a small faction of moderate Republicans left. That's kind of a minor miracle in and of itself. But that faction could actually swing elections, as you saw over and over again, and especially on election denying, democracy ending candidates. Now, of course, one of the worst ones is still outstanding. That's the future Mrs. Trump, Carrie Lake. And so that one's not decided yet. But even so, she's like, I don't trust this election, it's fraud. You might win, you idiot, right? But it doesn't matter. All she's got is lies. And so if she loses too, it'll be an absolutely great election. And remember, it's not that the Democrats won. They're gonna lose the House. And they're still 50-50 on the Senate at best. But at least insanity lost and democracy won. And that is huge. So that's why it was a great election no matter what.
And I think that while it's true you don't need to concede legally and you can still go on and govern, I think it is essential for our sense of a democracy, for us to be able to actually say we are a country that respects elections. And at least these people might have gone along with the big lie, but they won't do it going forward, and that counts for something.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.